welcome to Dateline New Haven on WNHH, New Haven's home for community radio. I'm Paul Bass, inviting you to look behind the headlines on the stories that make New Haven and our state tick. Today we're lucky to have back in the studio State Senator Gary Winfield, one of the original voices of WNHH from its founding, and a state senator since 2014 who's behind so many of the headlines these days and what we're trying to make happen in Connecticut. He's here to talk about this legislative session that just ended and the campaign that's just getting underway. Gary Winfield, welcome back to the studio. How you doing?
I am doing really, really good. Always happy to be back here.
Does it feel good when the session's over?
You have no idea how good it feels.
Well, that ending is crazy, right? Because at the end, it's like what bills are going to get there in the last hour.
Yeah.
Right? Everyone's like fighting for whether their priority from a whole session is going to get enacted.
Absolutely. In this session, it was a little bit different because of the pace of the session, given that, at least in the Senate, the Republicans started off from almost day one in go slow mode. So people really needed that kind of amped up part of the session to get some of the stuff done.
It was a short session, 13 weeks, right?
Absolutely.
And elections, years when you guys have to run for re-election, they keep the...
Yeah, that's the short session that we do. And the other year, it's January to June as opposed to February to May.
And in those other years, you craft the big 2-year budgets, and then you come back in the short session to see what can you tinker with, correct?
Well, we tried. We didn't really do this session, but normally that's what we do. Yeah.
So how'd the session go?
It was a strange session, a very strange session. It quickly became apparent that if we were going to do budget adjustments, we'd have a difficult time doing it. And then it became apparent that we likely weren't going to do one. And then we discovered we weren't going to do budget adjustments.
By that you mean that when people felt like a lot of money was coming into the state, you could do a little more for some of the people who are ailing, but that Ned Lamont, the Democratic governor, sort of set himself up, which you agree with, as sort of like the man in the middle. The legislature is liberal Democrats.
Yeah. And
he's the centrist Democrat, and he kind of stands in the middle between what you guys are passing and what the Republicans would want to pass.
And given the constraints that we currently have on ourselves, all of the budget constraints and some of the rules, what we would likely do, despite all that money coming in, is if we made adjustments to the appropriated budget, wind up cutting a lot of stuff, which seems insane, but that's what we would have been doing. And so I don't think anybody wanted to be in that position, particularly going into an election.
So he was saying you're not going to get me to agree to change the rule about the budget cap. Because what you're talking about is you're only allowed to increase the budget so much. Because they set it up so that if some years we have a lot of tax revenues, they didn't want it all to be spent because next year there might be fewer, right?
Yeah.
But you guys were arguing that the rule was a little bit rigid, that there was a lot of money and there's a lot of work that needed to be done. And Lamont was basically saying, I'm going to hold fast that rule. Is that right?
Right. And folks like myself have been arguing from the very beginning that we didn't have a scientific way of thinking about this. We were in a jam, if you will, back in 2017, 2018. And what we wound up doing was coming up with this guardrail approach to things and setting the point at which they trigger in a way that wasn't really necessarily super well thought out. So maybe we should re-examine it and figure out where to put it. The governor feels like what we originally did is what we should do. And so we're kind of at an impasse.
That's kind of interesting. I think he's Governor Weicker, don't you think?
I don't know. I mean,
it's not a put down, just like who he is, like the old Connecticut Republican when they were a more moderate party.
To many people, it feels like that. He's his own unique thing in many ways. And I think for a lot of folks who imagine having a Democrat as a governor would mean certain things, they are not seeing that come to fruition and trying to figure out how do you operate with the government.
One thing that's completely off the table is raising taxes on the very wealthy taxpayers so that they pay even half of what a working class person pays percentage-wise in taxes. That's just off the table because he said that punishes success, correct?
It is off the table, but it's not just off the table because of the governor's position. It's off the table because the party, the Democrats in that building, have decided that the governor is our guy, and we don't want to have that war with the governor. I think I'm a party guy as much as anybody, but I go there first because I have constituents who have needs. And so I think it's incumbent upon us to engage in that battle, whether the person at the top be a Democrat or a Republican. So I've been on record, and the videos all over the place of me talking about the need to have a conversation about making the tax system more progressive, and about these guardrails. I started off the session. One of the first things I said during the session was we need to have a new look at these guardrails. But you need a lot more folks who are willing to engage in that way. I understand why they don't, but I think we have a session coming up where the guardrails will be an issue, and then the session after that when not only will the budget session after that where the guardrails will be an issue again, and we have the coming of the 27 CBAC deal. I think we
agreement with
the unions, right, with the coalition of state unions. I think we will, whether we want to or not, have this conversation. I'd like to have this conversation when we're not in an emergent situation again.
And what you think the CBAC, the union upping authorization that deal is going to make it more of an emergency?
Yeah, listen. More and more as time goes on, you have the fixed portion of the budget eating up more of what you used to be able to do. That's just reality.
Because of debt.
Because of yes, right, and because of increasing costs to just do the basic stuff. Right. All of that together means that the fixed portion is larger. If you're not having a conversation about what you can do is less. Period. That's just the truth. And I'm not sure that just doing less is a smart way to operate.
All right, we're talking to State Senator Gary Winfield of New Haven. He's been a state senator since 2014 and a state representative since the 2008 election, taking off in 2009. Lives in New Hallville and represents a good chunk of New Haven and West Haven, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Right. So your priorities have often include criminal justice, even before you were a lawmaker. You have taken the leadership on a number of police accountability bills, keeping data on traffic stops by race. You've really kind of changed how police do the job in Connecticut. You're a co-chair of the Judiciary Committee,
yes.
Powerful position. This session, for the most part, would you agree, short session, after years of passing pretty difficult and major laws, you didn't pass anything major. Not that you need to pass a law every session, because you also want to make sure the old laws get put into place. Is it accurate to say this was not a year for passing a lot of laws about criminal justice?
Well, this was not a year to pass a lot of anything. Once that budget collapsed, what some people don't realize is once the budget collapsed, many of the bills have a fiscal note to them. So,
meaning if it costs money, you can't do it.
Right. Exactly. So as soon as we weren't doing a budget which would appropriate the money, we couldn't do the bills which had money that needed to be appropriated.
Could you do it if it's a small price tag and can use existing money within a department that's allocated? Like, for instance, cannabis sentence modification. Stuff that if someone was arrested for cannabis crime that now wouldn't be a crime, you wanted. Right. Well, that doesn't need a budget note, right?
No, that did. The sentence modification. So there was a bill that was of much concern to a lot of folks, and almost all these bills have a fiscal note of some sort because people have to do work, right? So. That is the case. There was a bill to modify sentences. There was a bill to look at people who had a conviction and whether or not they were still in our prison system. And I just want to focus on that for a second because a lot of folks really wanted that to get done. But what we realized was first it had a $4 million note on it. So that's when you have no budget, that's a lot of money, even though you have a $20+ billion budget. But also, what we discovered, because some work had already been done on this manually, was that we weren't finding a lot of cases. So you're spending $4 million to maybe not find anything. As much as I want to get that done, I can't really make that argument in the climate.
For people arrested for stuff that now is legal, or is it more of the case that they're still in prison when they should have been let out?
Well, it was for people who are arrested for things that are now legal, but the question is, are there people who are in our prison system now with that, right?
And so, there aren't that many.
If any.
Okay.
Right.
And then there was another that passed your committee but died in transportation to decriminalize psilocybin, magic mushrooms. And it's legal now for these experimental trials, right? There's a lot of mental health trials going on.
Yeah, the state had I don't know if we called it a task force or a committee. They all do the same thing. We give them different names. But it had one that didn't come to a complete agreement. And I think that helped to dam the bill. because some folks who didn't want to do any kind of drug legalization use that as a means of not moving forward with the bill, questioning whether we should be moving forward, and then bringing up all of the things that they see as a problem with cannabis legalization.
And so, what about psilocybin decriminalization? How do you feel about that?
I was a part of the committee. I tend to be on all of these things, and I think that we should do the decriminalization because drugs are a public health issue. They're not a criminal issue. There's a criminal element when you have drugs as illegal as substances, right? There's money to be made on the black market and all of that, but the actual issue is a public health issue, and so. We should be getting smarter on these things. We know better. We should do better. It's one of those kind of cliche.
I find psilocybin really interesting because, unlike with cannabis, which I would argue a lot of the medical, when they first made medical cannabis legal, I think that was kind of phony because a lot of stuff really wasn't proven, and that we really just all believe it should be legal. Just be legal, do it. There really is some very serious research about psilocybin to treat trauma. So I guess there are two questions there. The medical thing, which is real, but also recreationally. Like, are there differences between drugs? Like, would you want cocaine to be legal, heroin, fentanyl, psilocybin? Are these drugs different kind of drugs?
They're different kind of drugs. I think the approach should be a public health approach to it.
So you would also have legal cocaine, but just have like a lot of aid for people with cocaine problems?
Yeah, I think, and this is hard. Everybody has their own individual perspective, but I think part of what sometimes draws people to it is the illicit nature of the thing, right? You don't touch that. Well, I'm going to go see what that's all about.
Yeah.
So I think we have to have a smarter approach, an educational approach, as I said, a public health approach, but criminalizing these things in the way that we have is problematic. Now, if you're talking huge quantities and people moving this stuff for a certain reason, I think they're just like with cannabis right now, right? Like if you have huge quantities and you're trying to sell it and do, yes, absolutely, you can have a criminal justice approach to it. But for what most people would consider recreational use, I don't really understand the point of what we've done traditionally.
So I think we would all agree marijuana, cannabis criminalization did not work. So the question is, how do you make it work when you legalize it? You put a lot of effort into this. So did some other people. You were hoping there'd be opportunities for people of color in areas who were hit hard by the drug war to get the licenses. I'm not sure how that's worked out. Not great.
Not amazing, but we also did something unique, right? We have a social equity council and a social equity fund because my belief was that unlike where it's happened in most states, there should be some actual direct reinvestment into the community.
There was such interesting catch-22s there because I remember one person eventually did get to go in business, but it took an extra year. You know what I'm talking about. To get the capital, if you're black, is often harder.
Right.
So you get a partner. But then if you get the partner, the Social Equity Council and the decision makers are concerned that you're a front for white people's money.
Sure.
That's kind of a tough catch-22.
It is. I mean, that's why you have a council that's supposed to be thinking about and looking at these issues.
The council resigned. Andrew Comer, what was that about?
I don't know the internal machinations, but she's back now. Okay. So that resignation was short-lived.
She unresigned.
Well, she was asked to unresign. But also in other ways, the social equity money I'm talking about, separate from the equity partners and all of that, social equity monies took monies from the profits that were made but for the state and sequestered those so that those could be reinvested. That was unique, and people thought I was kind of crazy. Like, what is this?
Why is it crazy?
Because it has not what's been done anywhere else, right? And so, but to my mind, if we are really going to make recompense for what has happened, then we have to do that. Equity requires that we do more than we've already done. And so using monies to invest in businesses in those communities, in some of the nonprofits that are doing really good work, that kind of stuff with a forward-looking, future-looking approach, I thought was unique and very important to getting those communities back on track.
And how has that gone?
The money hasn't gone out yet. So we passed the bill in 2021. They couldn't have gotten the money out the door until late 2023. It still hasn't gone out, and now there's a question about whether it's going to go out this year or beginning July of 2025. And we don't have a resolution to that yet.
How much money are we talking about?
So they're kind of, depending on what happens, if it goes out this year, it'll be $22 million that go out to the various communities, and then there's $13 million that the governor would like to use for state agencies. I'm opposed to that. And so I hope that the $13 million also goes back into the communities, which was what I intended when I wrote that.
What's his argument?
He thinks that there are things that need to be done, like child care and other things, and he's right. But that's what a state budget is for. And if we're doing an equitable thing, which is to do more than we've done, then do that through the state budget. Again, we just had the conversation about guardrails and our ability to do things. The governor has the power to make the things he wants happen. He should not be taking these monies that are designed to do additional things, to do things we already should do.
So I'm not someone who goes out and buys cannabis, so I could be wrong about this. My impression was the idea is we would have licensed dispensaries, so it'd be safe. You know what you're getting. There's no fentanyl in it. There's no organized crime in it. But it seems to me that basically every smoke shop sells cannabis. Am I wrong? I mean, like, basically people are not just going to dispensaries to buy, and that there's a huge black market still, which we were supposed to wipe out. Am I wrong about that?
I'm probably not the best person to ask. My father was a drug addict. I stay as far away from drugs as possible. I have a fear of them. So I'm really probably not the best person. But my understanding is that, yes, there's still a black market. And I don't know that we thought we were going to completely wipe out the black market. There's a conversation that is had when you try to legalize cannabis about what taxes mean on the product, whether it's makes more sense for someone to go and buy the legal product versus the illegal product, the effect of it, all of that.
Safety's an important issue.
Yeah.
Harry says San Fran has a managed alcohol program. They're giving alcohol to alcoholics. Have you heard of this?
No, but I've heard of other programs where they give a drug to the people who have an addiction. So
safe injection sites. Yeah. So what do you think of that?
I think if it's well thought through and monitored, it's probably a better approach than a lot of what we do.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I also think that many people find that idea revolting, right? So I get both sides of that argument. But as an individual, I think it's a smart approach.
You did. There was some action that was taken on criminal justice for sure. You updated monitoring of body cameras, especially with how police use or don't use. Was your big concern that when they turn them off and say, I just forgot, like to make sure they don't turn off their cameras to watch what they're doing?
So I believe that started as someone suggesting to us that what was happening in some instances, police were, and I don't know the intimate functioning of the camera itself, but they were able to turn off the sound while the video was going. And sometimes you need the sound, not just the video. And clearly, again, I was involved in writing this, so I know clearly the intention was that when you have it on, it's on in a way that captures both video and sound. Some folks suggested to me that there was a loophole that I don't understand how that loophole exists, but we went back to clarify through Post would make the clarification as the law suggests. We went back to clarify that when we wrote these laws, we meant that the camera is on and functioning and capturing all that it is capable of capturing.
So that's the law now.
That Post will promulgate this such that yes, yeah.
And then also, there was a prison ombudsman set up, but you guys did not accept the person who was chosen by the committee. Barbara Fair and Ken Krajewski, both in New Haven, do the kind of work you were very involved in before you, since as well. But that kind of started your career in politics, was criminal justice activism. They got turned down by the committee, and Hillary Carpenter was chosen, but you folks did not approve her, correct?
To clarify, Ken was actually chosen.
Oh, he was chosen.
He was number 1, Barbara was number 2, and Hillary was number 3.
So why did they skip to number 3?
The governor skipped to number 3.
Oh, so he would go back again about the kind of...
He had issues with Ken and Barbara. And
is that because Ken ran for AG as a
no,
or because Barbara's lefty?
It's because Ken had sued the state, sometimes successfully on behalf of prisoners. And Barbara is Barbara. I was with her 20-some-odd years ago. And she is a person who's going to fight, and it's not always going to feel good, right, for the person who's on the other side of it.
Well, so if Ken's suing the state, isn't that what you want? Someone who's an ombudsman?
It's
or
what
say needs someone neutral who corrections people feel like you don't sue us.
It's what I want. Yeah. I want someone who's going to take this seriously and recognize there are points at which I love to get along, but I can't get along, right? That's the kind of person I want. It's not apparently who the governor wanted. And he didn't want somebody like Barbara who felt like she would fight on these issues in such a strong way. And he was looking for someone who was less that than someone who could manage these things. When I found out about this, I had called the governor's office and suggested to him that this would be problematic. And I suggested that one of the ways in which it would be problematic is that I would be doing 4 or 5 hours of filibustering in the Senate. Now, you can't really have me doing 4 or 5 hours of filibustering in the Senate. That's a problem for everybody. But he still made his choice. And then there was a conversation in which I was asked whether I was going to do that. And the answer was yes. So this created a real problem.
But why only 4 to 5 hours? At that point, they would drop them, you think, because they want to get other business done?
The last time I did a filibuster was about 3 hours. And it was, I don't just do the thing where I have, like my friend Senator Kissel, where he just goes on and on. I dissect whoever is on the other side of the filibuster. And so it's Democrat on Democrat violence. It's like,
so how do you get to do a filibuster? Do you just keep talking and not stop? Or
talking or questioning? You can question.
So you can go on as long as you want?
As long as you can do it.
And were you going to do this in general session or in the committee?
No, in the session. This would have been in the session because the committee it went through was not the Judiciary Committee. It went through executive noms. So when it would have come out of executive noms and hit the Senate floor, that I've done it before. So everyone.
What was your last filibuster about?
DNA upon arrest.
What was that?
So if you get arrested, even if there's nothing that you did, the police would take your DNA, and to me that seemed abhorrent. And so for about 5 years, I've been blocking this bill, and then one night the House let it through at about 3 a.m. It was one of those days we came in on a Saturday, and I was told that it got through the House, so the Senate was going to do it, and I was like, okay, I'm ready, because I think they thought you wouldn't be ready, but the way
what time of day was it when you started talking?
9 or 10 in the morning, something like that.
And what did you do? What did you talk about?
I don't have any clue. But I also, the thing that makes what I do a little different, I do a little bit of what Kensel does, but I also prepare very early with about 500 to 600 questions in addition to that. And if you just think about asking 500 or 600 questions, you have out.
500, 600.
Well, if you have let's say you have a sentence, right? And the sentence is, all bikes should be ridden downtown. I will ask you, well, what is all bikes should be ridden downtown about? And then I'll ask you, well, when you say bikes, explain to me what you mean by bikes. Do you mean tricycle? Right.
Should be called this Talmudic.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then, so who answers the question when you do a filibuster?
Whoever is the defender of the bill. In this case, strangely enough, it would have been the majority leader. That would have been not very pleasant for anyone.
What year was that?
Well, the year for the for that was actually Eric Coleman, who was the chair of Judiciary, a good friend of mine, and I felt terrible. 2015.
Okay, so you did it, and he went how many hours?
I think it was about 3 before they were like.
They relented?
They were like, how long are you going to go? And I went in the desk and showed them the questions and told them that I was like on question 2 or something. So it was clear we weren't going anywhere.
So the bill died.
The bill died, and they never brought it back again.
And so now this year, what you said, I'm ready to go again.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I was promising 4 hours. That was what the minimum would be. And also remember, this was coming up towards the end of session where every minute is crucial. So now you have the Democrat on Democrat violence. Every minute is crucial. I'm not an unrecognizable face. It's just a bad combination of things. So then the conversation began about, well, how do we deal with this? And I didn't have the ability, really, honestly, to pull back on my filibuster. So that never went through. There was a conversation with the Black and Puerto Rican Caucus about how do we get new folks. And the thing about that conversation is, one, I did not want to engage in it. But if we engaged in it, I did not want the process to close out Ken or Barbara, because they legitimately went through this process. And whether they prevail or not, they should be able to go back through the process.
So in the end, they just decided we're not going to do it this session.
So no, in the end, they decided we are going to do it. And what they were intending to do was have the Black and Puerto Rican Caucus and the governor meet and choose a consensus candidate, and then have the process start again. That person could go through it. Ken and Barbara could go through it. Anyone else could go through it. Clearly, the person doing the job, if they don't mess up, would have a leg up, but it would be more fair than just the governor picking. What happened was that was wrapped into another bill where this FOI exemption for the police was snuck into the bill. When I caught wind of it, I was like, we have to put a hold on this to figure out what we're really doing, because it was too much of an exemption.
What kind of exemption were they going to give the police?
Anytime that someone in any police force was under investigation, you'd have no access to any of the records until after the completion of the investigation. I thought
we would have, like, news organizations would have gotten nuts if you passed that.
Those who knew were losing their mind, and then I think they were happy that I wasn't in agreement with it, because me not being in agreement means it has a hard way to go. And so I was a problem for it, and I worked on rewriting this so that the information they really were trying to exempt was exempted versus...
Which was what?
My understanding is that what they were really trying to exempt was the name of the individual getting out before, but they had all records, right? So it was really the name and, like, badge number, which could be linked back to the name. But that took a while to suss out, and then we had to... Because it already passed through one chamber, we had to figure out how we were going to get it back through both chambers in basically the last day. That died. The ombuds bill died. But the governor...
What would have happened under the ombudsman? Who would have been the temporary?
I don't know. We hadn't gotten that far.
Or you would have agreed on a temporary.
We would have agreed on who the temporary was.
So how do you feel? Why was it so important to you that Barbara or Ken get picked?
It wasn't that. It wasn't as much as I like both of those individuals. It was that when we wrote it, and again, I'm in the middle of everything. I was right there when we wrote that. The intention was for the committee to pick and number them. So they weren't just, here's 3 picks. It was number 1, number 2, and number 3. And what people don't recognize in this conversation is the year before, the governor had vetoed this very bill. So we had to work with the governor's people in order to get the bill. So the governor, at least his administration, was fully aware of what the bill was, what its intention was, and they had to have sign off. And then he not only doesn't go for the pick, but he basically obviates what the intention of the law is and provides no explanation. So I felt like that is a violation of the process, not technically, but in the spirit of the process. And so to me, I just didn't think that was appropriate.
Isn't there also here a fundamental difference about what a prison ombudsman should be? If Lamont didn't want the prison ombudsman and then wanted one who wasn't going to make waves, isn't that a fundamental difference between what is the role of a prison ombudsman? And
that's the point I made. My point was that the governor seemed to not want this to happen, and then signed it, which he's not required to, signed it, but then seemed to operate in such a way as to not allow it to really happen. I'm one individual in that building. If they wanted to run the bill, they could have. It just wasn't something.
And why do we need a prison ombudsman?
We need people who are advocating for the people in the prison, right? Listen, Ken has sued the state and has prevailed at times. He didn't prevail because there aren't issues in our prison. Over many years, we've had all kinds of issues come to light about what happens in our prisons, and making sure that there is an independent voice that has access and can do that.
What are some of the big issues? You've talked a lot about solitary confinement, people overusing that. Talked about access to health care. What are some of the other biggies?
I think access to health care is huge. And, I think having someone who is a trusted person come and talk about any of the issues, whether it even be issues of ability to get into programmatic things in our prison, or any of the things you would imagine are actually happening in the prison that don't happen well, I think is useful, right? If you have somebody who is in prison or has been in prison, they're looked at askance by some of the members of the legislature. If you have someone like Barbara or myself, people assume that you have some vesting in this system and changing it. I think you need someone who is able to engage and has some level of respect in an ongoing basis. I think it's important.
And we're talking to State Senator Gary Winfield from New Haven about this legislative session that just ended and the campaign and the sessions to come. Another thing that happens on short sessions, tell me if you agree with this, a lot of time it's an opportunity to push forward bills that take a long time to pass. To raise the minimum wage took a long time, paid family leave. You personally, for years, led the effort to end the death penalty, even got it passed to have it vetoed, and finally you worked for the election of a governor who signed it. Some stuff that was going on this year in addition to psilocybin, how did we do on that? You wanted to pass evictions for cause.
Yeah.
You can't just kick someone out when their lease is up unless you have a good reason. Other people say, well, people who have a house have a right to decide they don't want certain people living there or not to have people living there anymore. What was your take on that one?
So the year before, I had been basically the only sponsor of that bill, and then the tenants unions across the state and others did a really good job of bringing a lot of folks to understand that this is a real issue. And I don't think that what we're trying to say is you have no right to kick somebody out who's terrible or whatever the case may be. But what we see happening right now are people being kicked out. There's no given reason, although sometimes we know the reason is they're advocating for themselves. And that
the church across the street there, who they own an apartment building, and people had to leave for months because they hadn't done maintenance on a burst pipe, and then they moved to evict two of them for organizing a union.
Right. That kind of thing. The folks who've been organizing these unions, who've been doing the work to kind of protect some of the most vulnerable people, get evicted for that. Right. That doesn't seem to make all that much sense to me. I know there are many people who disagree, but when you think about where we are as well in terms of your ability to go and get other housing, right? I'm glad I own my home because I don't know what I would do right now. And I'm not in a bad economic situation, any of that. So people who live in a much tighter situation, if they have no protections, I just don't know what happens with those ones. I have a case I'm dealing with right now that is exactly this case, and I don't really know how to help this person.
What about the bill? Did it make progress? Was the argument made? Josh Elliott always talks about you got to make the argument at first and then just keep it coming back, and you win over people at time. Are we looking at that kind of trajectory? There's a lot of opposition from real estate back people.
I feel like it's becoming the issue that's going to come back several years before we actually get it done. I think that's unfortunate. I don't think this is one of those things that takes all that much to really understand. You just look at the people who come to the building who ask the simple question, where am I supposed to live? Right? My landlord and I seem to be going fine. They didn't do this kind of maintenance or that kind of maintenance. I spoke up and now I don't have anywhere to live. I paid on time. I can demonstrate, all the things you would want from a tenant, except that the tenant was like, this stuff here doesn't belong here, be it trash or mice or whatever the case is. And the landlord doesn't want to deal with that. So, that's a problem. Having said that, there's a big housing issue in the state that I think requires a larger conversation. The majority leader in the House has been having this conversation for a long time. And at least the people that I've been invested in this conversation with are willing to have the conversation with anybody. We're not trying to destroy the ability of people, particularly those who have a small business, if you will, that deals with housing, to do that business. But we're also trying to make sure that in the state of Connecticut, you can have a place to live and feel and be relatively assured that if the wrong thing is happening there, you can stand up for yourself.
So slumlords are a big issue in New Haven. A few conglomerate management companies have more low-income rentals, often government subsidized, than the housing authority, and they're getting hauled into court in some cases for criminal negligence. Anything we could do on a state level about that?
I mean, that's if you can find them, right? And that's one of the bills.
We know who three of them
are. But there are several that you can't even find these people. And so one of the bills had to do with the information that had to be provided so that you could find these individuals so that you could take action against them.
Well, New Haven passed that bill where it said if you're an LLC, which I think it means evil corporation, or limited liability corporation, and then you don't have to list on the state document who is actually the money or who's in charge. So the city had a rule that if you're an LLC and you own housing, you have to list who the contact is who runs things.
Yeah.
What they found out, because follow-up is so hard, what they found out was that everybody who complied weren't a problem. So the people who told you who you can contact, that's fine because they do a good job. And all the people with the problem never listed the person. Right. So if you're going to pass a similar law at the state, how do we make sure that it's actually carried out?
Well, the law at the state would just require everybody to actually give you that information.
Right, but how are we going to enforce it? Because in New Haven, it's just turning out that it's only having people you don't need to monitor doing it.
Yeah, enforcement's always an issue, and I don't have the answer to that. But I know without it, that we won't get to an answer. So there, and this is the thing about the job that we have. I think we have to be semi-expert on a lot of things that we're not expert on. And I think a lot of the time our job is to have some expertise in one or two areas and have a direction that our constituency and their issues have pushed us in other areas. And so clearly to me, getting this right is the right way to go. I just don't know in terms of enforcement how you ensure that it happens.
We're talking to State Senator Gary Winfield of New Haven on Dateline New Haven. WNHH FM 103.5 FM live streamed at WNHH.org. So you running again? This election year.
I am running again. I've gone through my process of thinking of. Every time people like you don't just say yes. No. I think we really should figure out whether we're still capable of being effective, whether or not we really have the heart to do this. I've known people who have run again, but they didn't really want to be there. And it changes over time, right? You've gone through things, you've experienced the impact your work has or doesn't have on people's lives. I think that should all be taken into account before you run again.
So why are you running again?
One, I still do think I'm effective, so that's a good thing. And when I talk to people in my district, they feel that I'm having a positive impact. And it's work that it's interesting. I never intended to be doing this work, right? I wasn't actually anywhere near the list of things I thought I was going to be doing. I really thought I was going to continue to do engineering work. But it has allowed me to make deep changes in people's lives. I'll tell you really quickly. One night, I live at the corner of Winchester and Division. There's always an accident there, unfortunately.
Well, that's a wide street for driving.
And the light at that corner is always blinking, so people just
like a raceway.
Right. So there's always an accident there. I'm standing out there with another one of these accidents, and this woman comes up. She goes, "Listen, I'm not even angry because I know you don't know who I am." I'm like, good. And she says, "But you did this, this, and this, and it changed my life." And I'm trying to figure out, like, if I did all that, she's like, "You did, but you did it on the phone," right? And, those kind of things just make you realize that if you're really doing this job well, you can have deep impact on people's lives.
When you look back, is it partly about getting rid of the death penalty, monitoring traffic stops by race to try to get rid of profiling? What are some of the
all of that stuff's important, but maybe more important is the stuff that's not even a bill. It's the stuff that you can do because you sit in the office, the way you can call up for people and advocate for them. Or even the simple stuff. I had last week I had a conversation at a school, and there was a young person who had a sexual assault, and I've had one in my past, and I talked about it. This person came up to me and said, "I've never spoken about this to anybody. Here's what happened," and they weren't getting help. And I was able to, because I was in that space, because of the office, tell the story in such a way that resonated with this person. They felt safe. And I'm working on opening up doors for that person that I would never have been able to. And that, to me, that's not directly the job, but it is an outgrowth of the job.
Service.
Yeah.
That's a big part for you.
Yeah, it's huge.
And so if you get, what would be some of the top priorities if you get reelected?
I would like to deal with the issue of the environment. We've been...
Nothing happened this term on that one.
Or the last term, or the environmental advocates are a little frustrated with the Democratic Party right now, and to a degree, I think they're right. I think we need to engage with them and figure out what our policy is there. So that's not the thing that most people would think I would start with.
Either. So I saw one thing that didn't get into the Senate, one idea that did pass the House, was to give incentives to business, not requirements.
Mm-hmm.
Use heat pumps more, and natural gas less.
Mm-hmm.
Is that the kind of thing you're looking to advance?
Yeah, I think that might have been part of the big omnibus bill they had, 5004. And the Senate had a big bill, Senate bill, I believe it was 11, two bills that should have gotten passed and gone to each chamber. But the Senate, as we spoke about at the beginning, was operating in a very strange way. And it just didn't happen.
So what kind of environment? Do you have specifics or just in general get an agenda for dealing with climate change?
So I was signed on to that bill because I agreed with much of what was 5004. That I was actually signed on to both bills. I would like to take a look at 5004 and figure out, once I know what the new legislature looks like, what is possible. So I don't have that yet.
So break it down to what's possible.
Mm-hmm. Break it down to what's possible. That doesn't mean likely. That just means possible. And figure out if I can help move policy forward. These folks have come to the legislature year after year after year, and there is a level of frustration there, and I understand it, and I want to be helpful.
And other kind of top priorities as usual: criminal justice, decriminalization.
Sure.
And how about red light cameras? How do you feel about how that rolled out? I don't remember where you were on that law.
I was one of the folks who initially was opposed to it and helped to force some of the changes that were put into the final legislation, and ultimately did vote for it once we got there. But that took, 6-7 years, something like that. And so just on that point, that's a good reason sometimes why legislation doesn't happen, because folks need to be listened to. How it's rolled out, I'm not sure we know the complete landscape, but we're watching and ready if we need to make changes to the state law, which is hopefully the way we always do things. But clearly on this, there was an issue for the Black and Puerto Rican Caucus, which at this point is 42 people out of 151. It's a huge minority of folks. It is something that we are definitely looking at and making sure that if we need to, we can make changes.
Then you got an opponent this year, Nyrell Moore.
I do.
Do you know this person?
I don't know. I mean, I've done a little bit of research. I know he associated with UConn, played some football, that kind of thing. I don't know Nyrell.
So you work out a lot, so you can you can go against a football player. You still working out every morning at 6?
I do, but I'm 50. He's like 27 or 28.
Wait a second! Don't give up before you start. I see you do all those reps.
Listen, I got a lot of gray hairs these days.
Nothing wrong with that. What about ombudsman? Is that going to come up again?
So currently, the governor has said that he's going to, even though we didn't pass the version of the bill that we actually got to, he's going to stick to that. And so I'm actually in conversation. I've been in conversation actually today with his administration about setting up the initial meeting. So
what's the goal?
The goal is to do exactly what we would have done had we passed it, which is have a conversation, come with a consensus individual, and get the committee to do the work of coming back to us.
Wait, I'm sorry. So the idea is that the Black Hispanic Caucus and the governor will work on a consensus candidate together?
Mm-hmm.
Will there still be the 3-person interview process? Or?
Well, I think that the way it would work is there'd still be at least 3 people that would put forward to the governor. Yes, that would still happen.
But then there'd be the discussion about the consensus among the 3?
No. So the consensus would happen now, right? Well, not today, but in the next couple of weeks.
For an interim.
Right, for an interim. Right, and then there will be the process with the committee where out of that are 3 recommendations to the governor. One assumes that unless the interim person is just doing a horrible job, they're one of those people, and then the governor has an opportunity.
How do we avoid the same problem where he fundamentally doesn't want an advocate and you do?
I think the problem was that the way in which he did it didn't seem to respect the process, including not providing a public reason for not doing it.
So he can still do that again, right?
I don't think he would do that again.
So it's not as much you need a new process as much you need to go over and do it again and not have the same mistake made.
Right. I mean, given that the administration is aware that if they do that, they have at least one problem, which is sitting right here. I don't think we will see that happen again.
All right. And then, so you used to represent the 94th district,
Mm-hmm.
which has a long history of outspoken, left-leaning black leadership.
Mm-hmm.
The seat's open, and now there's 2 people vying for the Democratic nomination, Steve Winter.
Right.
Because there was confusion about whether Robin Porter, who has it now, was going to run again, so she's not running again. There was a convention. Steve Winter was picked. Now Abdul Osmanu is also running. Do you have a dog in the fight?
I don't. I know both of them. Abdul, actually, at some point, I work over at Southern, was a young person who would spend time in my office, just like a friend of his, Justin. And I probably had something to do with him getting into politics. And Steve, we've seen what Steve does politically. I think they're both good people. I haven't chosen, it's pretty recent, I haven't chosen a candidate in this race. But I think whatever happens, the 94th will be served. Well, I just have to say this because we're talking about the 94th. Whatever happened with Robin Porter, I think folks should remember what a good job she did for the 94th and what a voice she has been. And I think in many ways, even without being there, will continue to be for people who have voice but haven't always been heard.
So whoever wins, we're going to be okay.
I think you'll be okay.
All right, Gary, Winfield State Senator. Before you go, I want to talk about how politics looks to you now. Just 2008, when you ran, you had come out of an activist background, but you've continued on criminal justice, especially, but not only labor, LGBT rights, all that kind of stuff. What looks different to you 16 years later? Has there been a moment you said, "Oh, I didn't think I'd be working with this person, or I didn't know it was going to work out this way, or that I could or couldn't do this as a legislator"? You think of a moment this session that the 2008 Gary would have been surprised?
I'm not sure that I would have been surprised, because I'm the type of person, though I have strong convictions, my convictions lead me to figure out how to get things done. And sometimes that means that I have to reduce Gary and think about other folks, right? And that's a hard thing to do. We're A-type personalities and we think we belong in the spotlight. And so working with other people, particularly people who I disagree with, is a skill set.
We've always done that from the beginning.
Right.
And education issues, I remember.
Yeah.
So Markley, yeah.
And you hold your nose and do what you have to do. So that's not it. You know, I mean, for me, the way that politics has changed is I'm more senior in this, and I have a different role. I am not the person who's necessarily the first person you see as the advocate type legislator. I'm the more senior person who's trying to make sure that the young folks who are coming in are capable of navigating this process faster than I was, right? Because I help them to understand things that takes years to understand.
How
just
does this
shortcutting.
affect how you operate? Someone who has more seniority, more experience, more power as the judiciary co-chair.
Yeah, it allows me to help other people, and you know, in politics there are a lot of people who try to keep that to themselves, that ability to do things. I think being diffusive with the power that I have, if you will, helps other people, and in effect helps me. People want to help those who've helped them. And when you come into a place where it is very difficult to figure out how to operate, and someone says, "Come here, let me help you," and not ask for anything in return, usually that inures to my benefit as well, and my constituents.
So one of the ways you were known when you were first elected, among several, was that you were one of the first adopters of social media as a way to communicate a lot with your constituents. You'd show it was up all day, you'd explain why you voted, you'd hear from people more directly. Now everybody's on social media. Does it work the same way? Are we communicating in new ways or different ways from when you were?
What is social media is different these days, and I try to use all of the platforms. Although I used to use Twitter a lot. I don't. Twitter's a cesspool.
Are you off Twitter?
I'm not off it. I don't use it. I monitor Twitter now as opposed to using. I still use Facebook. I use TikTok. I haven't really used my Instagram a lot. I had some issues on Instagram, but I still have it.
Issues of use, or you still didn't like it?
Issues with people who just found it as a way to say all kinds of crazy things. And you know, as a public figure, I don't cut anyone off, right? So there are times at which I take a long hiatus from one or the other. But I think social media is clearly still a very important way to communicate. TikTok in particular, given some of the things going on in the state and the world, is a very powerful tool.
What do you think of the TikTok ban? Chinese ownership.
Chinese ownership extends to a lot of stuff. So, you know, I'm not necessarily in agreement with the TikTok ban. I understand why people who are older and don't use TikTok might see it that way. But it's a powerful tool that I hope we don't lose.
Older, like 51. Just teasing you there.
Yeah.
How's the landscape looking for you Democrats this year in the state and nationally? Because a lot of people feel it's kind of a done deal. We're going to get Trump. Biden's nothing Trump can do.
I don't know about that. I'll say in the state it looks really good, and we might even have more Democrats than some people actually want, even Democrats. Nationally, I'm not sure. I've looked at some of these polls. Some of the stuff that you see, if you look at the internals of the polls, don't actually make sense. Most people don't look inside the internals. So I would say to people, be careful about...
I am seeing definite movement of black and Latino voters toward Trump, unmistakably, and away from the Democrats.
Yeah, some of that I believe to be real. Some of it, the numbers don't make sense when you look at it. And so I think folks need to be a little bit careful about what they draw from some of that stuff. But, you know, I look at internals, not everybody.
But even Republican strategists will agree with your first point, which is that if it says 40%, it's not going to be 40%.
Right.
But everyone's kind of agreeing it's going to be higher than it was.
That's probably true.
So what's Biden going to do? What kind of hope does Biden have?
I don't know what Biden's going to do. I think, yeah. But I think Biden needs to think about who he's talking to and things that are actually important to them, not things that are signifying things that are real.
Example?
So if I'm talking to a black audience, just saying I support HBCUs is one thing, but talking about the experiences they're actually having, the problems they're having in the economy and all of that, recognizing those things, I think goes a long way, even if you don't have the actual solution.
You think Biden was a strong candidate for them?
I think Biden at the time when he was chosen initially was a strong candidate. I don't know that the alternatives would have done better than Biden.
Gotcha.
And despite the age and all of those things.
Well, Gary Winfield, it is always such a pleasure to have you on radio. The time does go fast, and it does run out.
Yeah.
State Senator Gary Winfield, running for re-election as a Democrat. Thanks for joining us today. Thank you, Harry Drost, the best station manager in the take it out with the Afro-Semitic experience. Performing I Wish I Knew How It Would Feel to Be Free from the group CD A Plea for Peace. And I'm working on this Paul Bass. Invite you to fly with us all day. And New Haven's home.